Josh Duggar's past is no stranger to controversy, but just when you thought the worst had already been exposed, new and deeply unsettling content has resurfaced, leaving fans reeling. This time, it's not just about what he did behind closed doors, it's what he said on camera, in public, and with a smile. Recently, disturbing footage and screenshots have begun circulating online, drawing renewed attention to what appear to be jokes Josh made involving incest, comments that, in hindsight, feel chillingly sinister given everything we now know about his dark past. These aren't just tasteless lines from a reality TV star, they're potential red flags that were hiding in plain sight for years. Fans who once dismissed Josh's awkward sense of humor are now looking back with horror. Were these jokes subtle cries for help? Sick attempts at deflection? Or calculated manipulation, masked as comedy? And how did those closest to him, his parents, his wife, and the Duggar family empire, allow this behavior to go unchecked for so long? In today's deep dive, we're unpacking the resurfaced footage, examining the context around it, and connecting it to the broader, darker timeline of Josh Duggar's behavior. What we've uncovered is not only disturbing, it may also reveal how deeply ingrained the dysfunction was within the Duggar family long before the public knew the full truth. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning. As disturbing as it is to revisit, a storm of outrage erupted recently after some unearthed footage of Josh Duggar began circulating online. These clips, pulled from old interviews, behind-the-scenes moments, and even promotional content from 19 Kids and Counting, showcase a version of Josh that many viewers now find chilling. What's especially unsettling are the alleged jokes, or suggestive remarks that touch on themes of incest, comments that may have been brushed off as awkward or immature at the time, but now read as deeply inappropriate and eerily prophetic. One clip that's especially sparked backlash features Josh during a Duggar family Q&A session, where he jokingly nudges a sibling and makes a crack that could be interpreted as flirtatious or suggestive. The crowd laughs nervously, including members of the family. At the time, many viewers assumed it was just a poor attempt at humor, something you'd expect from a teenager trying too hard to be funny. But with the benefit of hindsight, those laughs now ring hollow. Another video shows Josh making a bizarre quip while filming a scene in the Duggar household, loosely referencing the idea of being too close for comfort, with his sisters during a segment about the family's crowded living space. On the surface, it may have passed as a lighthearted take on large family living. But in the context of what we now know, his admitted molestation of several of his younger sisters, these remarks have taken on a much darker and disturbing tone. Fan reactions have been swift and intense. Social media exploded with commentary from former fans and critics alike, expressing horror that such clips were ever aired, let alone laughed at. Some have called out TLC and the production team for turning a blind eye, suggesting that warning signs were always there but intentionally ignored for the sake of the wholesome family image being sold to millions. What's even more troubling is how the Duggar family themselves appeared to respond, or rather, how they didn't respond. In many of these moments, you can see Jim Bob and Michelle either laughing along or simply brushing past the comment without acknowledgement. This raises serious questions about whether the family was actively trying to maintain an image of unity and innocence, even if it meant ignoring red flags. Were these awkward comments just swept under the rug as part of the boys will be boys mentality that plagued their home culture? Some insiders have even pointed out how the Duggar household was steeped in a kind of toxic purity culture that emphasized appearances over accountability. Within that context, making light of serious subjects, like incest, might have been excused as long as it stayed behind the mask of humor. But that illusion has long since shattered, and now the public is combing through every old video with a new level of scrutiny. The fact that these comments resurfaced at all points to a much broader reckoning underway. Viewers and former fans are no longer content to accept the Duggar story at face value. They want answers. They want truth. And above all, they want to know why so many warning signs were ignored when the cost was so high. Now let's pause and really connect dots between Josh Duggar's so-called jokes and his deeply disturbing past. Because once you lay the timelines side by side, it's no longer just cringe. It becomes downright chilling. As many viewers know by now, Josh Duggar's history of inappropriate sexual behavior towards several of his younger sisters was first brought to light in 2015 when a police report from 2006 surfaced. The disturbing details revealed that Josh, then a teenager, had molested at least 5 underage girls, 4 of whom were his own sisters. The abuse reportedly happened between 2002 and 2003, when Josh was around 14 to 15 years old. Now here's where things get dark. Some of the jokes and awkward interviews we've unearthed date from the early 2010s, well after these alleged incidents. That means by the time Josh was publicly making incest-related jokes or engaging in uncomfortable banter with his siblings on camera, he already had that history. And more importantly, the family knew about it. Let's think about that for a second. Josh's own past included confirmed inappropriate contact with his sisters, and yet, on more than one occasion, he made offhand comments that hinted, whether consciously or not, at taboo topics like incest or sibling intimacy. These weren't just tasteless lines from a clueless reality star. They were comments made by someone with a known history of sexual misconduct within the family. Take, for example, a resurfaced scene from a 2013 behind-the-scenes clip where Josh jokes about keeping it in the family in front of the camera crew. At the time, most people just shrugged it off as awkward Duggar humor. But when you place that clip alongside the abuse timeline, the tone changes dramatically. It feels less like a joke and more like a red flag, a moment of dark irony, or even deflection from a deeper truth. And here's the question we all have to ask. Were these jokes a twisted way to normalize or downplay what had happened? Or were they unconscious confessions, leaks in the facade the Duggars tried so hard to maintain? Either way, the fact that these moments were aired on national television and were never edited out or addressed by TLC speaks volumes about the network's willingness to prioritize image and ratings over the truth.
So what do you think?
Were these jokes simply Josh being inappropriate? Or were they carefully concealed signals that something far more disturbing had always been simmering just beneath the surface? This is where the glossy surface of Duggar perfection begins to crack, and once you see the patterns, you can't unsee them. As we step deeper into this unsettling story, the question becomes louder and harder to ignore. What did the Duggar family actually know about Josh's behavior? And when did they know it? The timeline is muddy. The details are buried beneath rehearsed interviews and carefully worded statements, but pieces of the truth have managed to claw their way to the surface. We know that Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar were aware of Josh's inappropriate behavior as early as 2002 to 2003. According to their own words in later interviews, they were informed by one of their daughters, and Josh eventually confessed. But instead of contacting authorities or seeking meaningful professional help, the Duggars chose to handle the situation internally. Jim Bob first brought the issue to church elders, not the police. The family framed this as spiritual discipline. In hindsight, it reads like damage control. And when they did take Josh to speak to someone in law enforcement, it wasn't an intervention. It was a conversation with a family acquaintance, a state trooper named Joseph Hutchins. Hutchins, shockingly, was later convicted on child pornography charges himself. That detail alone paints a deeply troubling picture of the circle of authority the Duggars trusted. Josh wasn't charged. He wasn't punished. He went back home. Years later, Jim Bob and Michelle would go on national television to claim they did the best they could with the information they had. But that line didn't sit right with critics. Because by the time 19 Kids and Counting hit the airwaves, Josh's past wasn't a mystery to his parents. It was a secret. That's where the spin machine really starts to hum. The family, with the help of their PR handlers, painted Josh as a reformed Christian young man. They presented a smiling, well-dressed front to the world, while keeping the most disturbing chapters of their story locked behind closed doors. Michelle doubled down on purity culture messaging. She talked about modesty, about protecting her daughters' hearts, while knowing that her own daughters had allegedly been victims under her roof.
And TLC?
That's the next big question. Did the network know? Officially, TLC claimed they were unaware of the abuse when 19 Kids and Counting began airing. But critics argue that it's hard to believe a show built on a devout family's beliefs never did a thorough background check. Even if they didn't know the details, it's likely they were aware of something. And when the truth did surface, TLC initially stood by the show. Only after intense public backlash did the network finally pull the plug. Still, even after canceling 19 Kids and Counting, TLC launched Counting On, a rebranded version that focused on the Duggar daughters and younger children. Josh was excluded from the show, but the scandal still cast a long shadow. Many saw Counting On as a way for the Duggars to rehabilitate their brand and continue profiting from fame, even while refusing to fully address what happened. It raises an uncomfortable reality. Everyone, from the parents to the network, seemed more interested in controlling the narrative than confronting the harm. The girls who were harmed were left to navigate life in the spotlight with smiles and soft-spoken soundbites, while the system that failed them continued to thrive. The show must go on, right? But behind those staged family dinners and group prayers, there was a chilling truth. One that fans now question with increasing urgency. Did the Duggar family protect their daughters, or protect their image? And in doing so, how much damage was allowed to continue in the name of reputation? When the disturbing footage and inappropriate jokes made by Josh Duggar began resurfacing online, fans didn't hold back. Social media platforms like Reddit, Twitter, and TikTok lit up with outrage. The once devoted followers of 19 Kids and Counting expressed a deep sense of betrayal, not only from Josh, but from the entire Duggar family and the TLC network. Many longtime viewers who had grown up watching the Duggars and admired their wholesome values now saw those early seasons through a much darker lens. Posts began circulating with side-by-side comparisons. Moments from the show where Josh appeared overly affectionate with his sisters, now seen as disturbing in hindsight, contrasted with his offhand jokes that suddenly didn't seem so innocent. The backlash wasn't just emotional, it was pointed. Fans demanded accountability. Petitions were relaunched, calling for TLC to issue a formal apology for ever platforming the Duggar family. Some even pushed for investigations into the network's involvement, accusing TLC of ignoring red flags in the name of ratings. What makes this backlash especially potent is how different it feels compared to the early days of the scandal. When 19 Kids and Counting was first pulled from the air in 2015 after news of Josh's molestation came to light, there was definitely outrage, but it was quieter, more muted. Social media wasn't as widespread in its influence back then, and there was still a portion of the audience that tried to defend the Duggars, framing it as a forgiven sin from the past. Now, in 2025, things have changed. The public is less forgiving and more empowered. Audiences are quicker to scrutinize what they're watching and call out networks for platforming problematic figures. The rise of digital receipts, screenshots, archived clips, and timestamps makes it nearly impossible for influencers and public figures to bury their past. Even TLC's attempts to distance itself from the Duggar brand seem insufficient to many. Viewers feel the damage was done the moment TLC allowed Counting On to launch as a spin-off, despite Josh's crimes and the unresolved trauma of his victims. That decision, in hindsight, looks less like a fresh start and more like a calculated move to continue profiting off the family while sweeping the darkest truths under the rug. In the eyes of many fans, the resurfaced jokes don't just implicate Josh. They shine a harsh light on a culture of silence, complicity, and performative righteousness that enabled him. This new wave of backlash isn't going away quietly. It's part of a growing reckoning, not just for the Duggars, but for reality TV families who have long hidden dysfunction behind carefully curated images. As disturbing as Josh Duggar's resurfaced jokes are, they raise deeper questions about his psychological state at the time. What would compel someone with a known history of abusive behavior, someone who had already been part of a hidden family scandal, to joke so flippantly about topics like incest? Was it arrogance? A defense mechanism? Or something even more troubling? Psychologists and trauma experts often point to narcissistic traits when analyzing similar public behaviors in high-profile abusers. Narcissism isn't just about vanity. It can include a sense of grandiosity, entitlement, and an inability to take genuine accountability. When Josh Duggar made those jokes, some experts might interpret that as a display of power, a way to control the narrative, mock the truth without exposing it fully, or to test the boundaries of what he could get away with under the public eye. This kind of behavior may also be viewed through the lens of compartmentalization, a common tactic used by individuals who maintain a public self that is dramatically different from their private self. Josh, raised in a hyperconservative, image-obsessed household, likely learned early on how to curate his appearance. But beneath the surface, a darker persona was simmering, one that occasionally leaked out in jokes that now seem anything but harmless. Some therapists argue that when people like Josh joke about taboo topics they've personally engaged with, it can be a form of guilt displacement or even an unconscious cry for help. The joking becomes a warped attempt to normalize or minimize what they've done. In Josh's case, these quips could be seen as attempts to test whether people would catch on, or to feel some control over a truth that was already threatening to spill out. There's also the possibility of delusion or emotional detachment. By making jokes, Josh may have been trying to dissociate from the gravity of his actions. Humor, especially dark or inappropriate humor, is often used by people who can't face the consequences of their past. But when someone jokes about abuse, it's rarely innocent. It's revealing. Finally, his public behavior sharply contrasts with what survivors of the Duggar family have later described about his private actions. This duality is a classic sign of manipulation, where the abuser plays the role of a clean-cut, devout family man to the outside world, while maintaining control and secrecy behind closed doors. The fact that he continued making these jokes, despite already being counseled and supposedly rehabilitated, may point to a deeper, unresolved pathology. In the end, whether it's narcissism, guilt, or pure arrogance, Josh's disturbing humor reveals more than just poor taste. It exposes a psychological pattern of minimizing harm, evading accountability, and distorting reality, traits that make his behavior all the more dangerous. As Josh Duggar's crimes came to light, one of the most heartbreaking layers of the story was the lasting impact on his victims, his own sisters. Now adults, Jill and Jessa Duggar were the first to step forward and publicly identify themselves as two of the girls Josh had abused. Their decision to speak out came during a tense and emotional interview with Megyn Kelly in 2015. At the time, both women tried to downplay the abuse, calling it mild and inappropriate touching, likely a result of years of conditioning and pressure to protect the family's reputation. But even in that carefully managed interview, the emotional toll was clear. Since then, Jill, in particular, has radically changed her relationship with the family. She and her husband, Derek Dillard, have spoken out against the toxic control of Jim Bob Duggar and have distanced themselves from the Institute in Basic Life Principles, IBLP, teachings that ruled their childhood. In her book, Counting the Cost, Jill detailed the trauma, manipulation, and betrayal she endured, not only from Josh's abuse, but from how the family and TLC handled it. She described learning about the extent of the abuse years after the fact, and how she was re-victimized when the story became a national headline. She also revealed that her own parents didn't advocate for justice or healing but instead rushed to damage control and public relations management. Jessa's response has been more reserved. While she also identified herself as a victim, she has remained largely within the family's orbit. She's spoken about the hurt but has not taken the same public stance as Jill. Still, fans have noticed subtle signs of tension, moments of distance, quiet exits from family events, or unexplained absences from group gatherings. These suggest a more complex, perhaps conflicted response as she tries to balance loyalty to her family with personal pain. The ripple effect of Josh's actions fractured the once tightly bound Duggar family. What was once portrayed as a picture-perfect unit has now splintered into factions, some siblings choosing independence and openness, others clinging to the old ways. Amy Duggar King, the family's outspoken cousin, has repeatedly slammed Josh and called for accountability from Jim Bob and Michelle, emphasizing that the victims deserve protection, not a cover-up. Moreover, the trauma of being thrust into the public eye as survivors has left emotional scars. Jill has admitted to struggling with anxiety and boundaries, noting how difficult it was to be both a reality TV star and a victim of abuse at the same time. There's a deep sense of betrayal, not only by Josh but by the family institution that enabled him and prioritized the brand over healing. Fans and mental health advocates have continuously called for greater recognition of the psychological toll this scandal has taken on the women involved. Public scrutiny only compounds the trauma, and for a long time, these women bore the burden of shame for something they never caused. Now, as the dust settles and more truths come to light, it's clear that Josh's crimes didn't just harm his victims in the moment. They disrupted their entire lives, relationships, and sense of self. And as the Duggar family continues to fracture and redefine itself, it's the survivors, like Jill, who are finally reclaiming their voices and finding the strength to break free from the silence that bound them for so long. As we wrap up, it's impossible to ignore just how disturbing Josh Duggar's so-called jokes really are, especially when viewed through the lens of his troubling history. These weren't harmless quips but chilling warning signs that, unfortunately, went overlooked by many for far too long. The cultural impact of this cannot be overstated. Society tends to idolize polished, picture-perfect family images, especially when they're broadcast on national television. But as we've seen, those glossy veneers can mask some very dark realities. It's a stark reminder that we need to look beyond surface-level appearances and hold public figures accountable for what may be hidden beneath. So, the next time you're presented with a seemingly perfect family narrative, remember to question what might be lurking behind the scenes. Awareness and vigilance are crucial if we hope to protect vulnerable individuals and prevent similar tragedies from happening again. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.